Hello, you beautiful souls. Have you ever wondered if you should buy the expensive alcohol markers or if some cheaper ones would already do the trick? Let's compare Copics with Ohuhu markers. In general, I'm using Copic Ciao markers because I like them the best. They're also the cheapest of them. They do come with a brush and a chisel tip. The Ohuhu markers that I have also have a chisel tip, and on the other side they have a bullet tip. I know that they also have a collection with brush tips instead of the small tip, so if you prefer those, Ohuhu still is an option. In general, I do prefer brush tips because I find them easier to control. The small brush tips of those markers, they can't really create dynamic lines that differ in thickness. For some people that works great, but if possible, I always go for the brush tip. But let's look at today's color palette. I don't have that many Copic markers to choose from, so I made a little selection of those first. Copic Ciao markers here cost around €4.50 for a single marker. That can get pricey quite fast if you want a lot of colors. I do have this massive bag of Ohuhu markers. It's the 320 set, which costs around $170. So if you break that down, one single marker would cost approximately 50 cents. Making it 9 times cheaper than the Copic Ciao marker. 320 markers is also an enormous amount of different colors. Especially for me, just recently having started with colorful art, it's actually almost too much of a choice. I've had them for around a year now, and I definitely did not get around to try every one of those colors. So before I can choose matching colors to my Copics, let's swatch them. I did notice that the caps of the markers aren't accurate all the time. It potentially could be an inconvenience to some, but to make up for it, Ohuhu did have those swatch cards included. I'm not kidding, this took some time. So this is my Copic marker swatches. I want to find the shades that look as similar as possible so that we can really get a good comparison. Even though there is a huge selection of the Ohuhu markers, I'm having some troubles matching my skin tones, especially if they aren't supposed to be too yellow or too pink. So that's the lightest one I found, trying to match my Copic skin tones. But apart from that, I think the tones are very similar, and I'm really curious how this is going to look. Let's start off with the Copic marker side. I wanted to create a piece using both kinds of markers instead of drawing two different artworks. So I'm also interested to see how they will go together when both brands meet in the middle. Let me give you some infos about Copic markers though. To my knowledge, they are pretty much the unrivaled flagship of alcohol markers and also cost accordingly. They have different types, from the classic ones with a chisel and a bullet tip, the Ciao markers and the sketch marker, which kind of is just like the big brother to the Ciaos. The tips are the same, but they have more ink. I think there also is a broad version, which, as the name suggests, has a very broad chisel tip. I think they're used for mostly like design and layout stuff. And while they are expensive, the good thing about them is that in general, all Copic markers, they can be refilled, and if the tips break, those can be replaced as well. What I really love about Copics is that they have an incredibly large color selection. Especially in the pastel and very light color range, they really stand out. They also blend really well, which is why I love to use them for my realistic marker portraits. The colors are really saturated and vibrant, and even if you're blending colors like yellow and blue, that can actually work pretty well. When I first started working with alcohol markers many years ago, I really wanted those Copics. Copics, the royals of alcohol markers, how could I not want them? And being younger and being allowed to be more naive, I also believed that my art would get so much better simply by using pro art supplies. I didn't have much of a budget, so I got them one marker at a time, which kind of took away a lot of fun for me. If you only have 4 markers, you're pretty limited in what you can do. So eventually I did lose interest in working with them after a relatively short time actually. So looking back, I would rather go for a larger color selection of cheaper markers than my very limited selection of Copic markers. Also, I might add that I definitely was not able to work with them to their full potential, simply because my skills of controlling them just weren't that great. And yes, skills develop with time and practice, but when you start driving, you don't start driving a Ferrari. A simpler car will teach you the fundamentals just as well. So you see, our shades are actually really smooth, the blending is really even, also the skin tones. Some of them are really light and the transition between the shades is just amazing. Let's have a quick peek at our color swatches again. I didn't find a matching color for every single one of my Copics, and looking at the skin tones, I can already see that there's going to be a bit of a difference. But let's put them to action first. I'm working with a smaller tip because it's easier to control than the chisel tip. It does feel different than the brush tip for sure, but it still works well enough to lay down my colors. I'm already using my lightest skin tone, and I can see that the overall skin tone of the right sister is going to be a bit darker than of the left sister. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, there is variety in people, but in terms of really trying to compare the colors, there is a little bit of a difference. The colors in general layer very well. The areas are smooth and not streaky. Some cheaper markers do fall flat in this regard, and to me, getting an even surface or an even area is the whole point of using alcohol markers rather than working with regular felt tips or water-based markers. Sadly, the Ohuhu markers cannot be refilled at this point, so once the ink has been used up, they are pretty useless. However, in March 2022, they did announce on their Instagram that they are in the late stages of development for refills. So I guess there's hope. The blending also works well with the Ohuhu markers. I personally feel that the quality of your blending also depends on the tip you're working with, but that might just be my opinion. Comparing to the Copics, the blending is not as smooth as on the left side, but the difference is really subtle. Coloring her hair, I honestly do not see a difference to the Copic marker ones. Maybe the only difference is the way they look due to the different tips that I applied the pigment with. If I did this with a brush tip, seriously, I would not be able to tell them apart though. For the background, the colors are super vibrant again, but as expected, the Ohuhu markers are falling a little bit short on the really light tones. In my opinion, Ohuhu markers are a great alternative to Copics. While they don't blend as smooth as the Copics and don't have the huge variety of pastel colors, they do quality work. I'd say it really depends what you are using your alcohol markers for. If you're doing really realistic portraits, for example, you might find yourself having a hard time with them. But for pretty much anything else, especially things that are a bit less complex and not dependent on really smooth color transitions, I think they are amazing. And I think, as I said before, they are a great choice for people who are on a budget or maybe just starting out. For your interest, this video is not sponsored and all opinions expressed are my own. So this is the finished artwork. I already told you my thoughts on it, and now I will let you be the judge of it. I hope this video helped you a little bit if you may be on the fence of what you should buy. At the end of the day, it depends on your skills, your budget, and what you actually want from your alcohol markers. Do you have any other favorite brands? If you would like me to compare other brands, let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Bye!